The grand chamber of the Zixer Dominion's War Council buzzed with tension. Towering figures adorned in ceremonial armor clustered around a holographic display, their claws clicking nervously against the crystalline table. On the display, static-laden footage flickered, a once thriving outpost reduced to molten slag. No ships, no bodies, just silence and scorched earth. "This isn't natural," hissed one of the counselors, his voice strained. "Even the caver wouldn't leave no trace behind." "The caver?" scoffed another, his scaled brow furrowing. "This isn't their way. This reeks of the Terrans." At the mention of humanity, the chamber fell deathly silent. No one openly admitted to believing the tales, but the myth of the Terran warship lingered like a specter in their minds. "Legends," growled Admiral Skrull, breaking the quiet. He stood at the head of the table, his crimson eyes narrowing. "Old war stories to scare hatchlings." The counselors exchanged uneasy glances. "Then what?" one pressed. "Could turn an entire outpost to ash without setting foot on the ground? Without leaving debris?" Skrull's gaze shifted back to the display. He didn't reply. In recent cycles, humanity had risen from obscurity, carving their place in the galaxy with unnerving speed. Their technology was enigmatic, their strategy surgical. Entire fleets fell in battles so swift that survivors often claimed to have faced ghosts. No one knew where humanity had come from. No one knew the full extent of their military capabilities. But whispers grew louder. They don't just conquer, they erase. The Zixer had fought countless enemies, each one a known quantity with predictable methods. But humans were something else. Their unpredictability was as much a weapon as their ships. A clawed hand slammed against the table, pulling Skrull from his thoughts. "We must act," declared one of the counselors. "If this is the Terrans, they won't stop until they burn through the Dominion itself." Skrull stared at the trembling hologram, his mind calculating. "Panic won't serve us. If they are coming, we'll meet them on our terms, not theirs." He turned to his subordinates, voice low and commanding. "Assemble the fleet. I want scouts combing the sector, every sensor array online. If this Terran warship exists, we'll find it, and we'll destroy it." The chamber erupted into a flurry of activity, but doubt clung to the air. Skrull watched them disperse, his claws tapping the hilt of his ceremonial blade. Beneath his disciplined exterior, unease churned. Alone now, he pulled a data slate from his armor. The files on humanity were pitifully thin, half-truths and scattered reports. Yet one detail stood out. Humans were pragmatic, their ruthlessness tempered by an almost alien sense of morality. Skrull muttered under his breath. "What drives a species to wield such power, and still leave survivors to tell the tale?" His claws tightened around the slate. The coming battle wasn't just about survival. It was about understanding humanity's truth. And Skrull wasn't certain which terrified him more, their weapons or their motives. A ripple in the void announced its presence long before it was seen. The sensors of Skrull's fleet screamed in protest, overwhelmed by a cascade of anomalous readings. Then, from the darkness, it emerged, the Terran warship. It was unlike anything Skrull had encountered. Vast and seamless, its hull shimmered with a dark, almost organic quality, as though it pulsed with life. Swirling around it was a faint, ethereal energy field, a corona of shifting hues that defied analysis. Each pulse seemed to ripple through the Zixer fleet's systems, disrupting their shields and sensors. Skrull's bridge crew faltered. Whispers of dread spread like wildfire across the comms. This was no ship. It was a leviathan, a predator that had wandered into their domain. "It's alive," murmured one of Skrull's officers, their voice trembling. Skrull gritted his teeth, suppressing his own unease. "Silence!" he barked. "They're trying to unnerve us. Focus on your stations." But his own gaze remained fixed on the behemoth, unease coiling tighter in his chest. Then, without warning, the Zixer fleet's displays flickered and died. A single message appeared across all channels, accompanied by an unnervingly calm voice. "Zixer Dominion, this is the Terran warship Invictus. You have trespassed into human-protected space and violated interstellar accords." Surrender peacefully, or we will ensure you cannot violate them again. The voice was cold, almost clinical, devoid of the bravado Skrull expected from a conquering force. That calmness unnerved him more than any threat could have. Open a channel, he ordered. When the line connected, he faced the silent black screen. Terran vessel, this is Admiral Skrull of the Zixer Dominion. We do not surrender to myths. If you mean to attack us, show yourselves and face honorable combat. The response was immediate but unhurried, almost as if the human speaker pitied him. Your understanding of honor is irrelevant. Your actions have consequences. Prepare to comply. The transmission ended. Before Skrull could react, the Invictus moved. The energy field surrounding the warship flared, and beams of light shot out, striking Zixer ships with terrifying precision. But there was no destruction. Systems failed in unison, engines, shields, and weapons rendered inert with surgical exactness. Entire squadrons floated helplessly in the void, their crews stunned by the swiftness of their defeat. This isn't warfare, one of Skrull's officers whispered, panic thick in their voice. It's a demonstration. Skrull clenched his fists as reports flooded in. No casualties, no ships destroyed, yet his fleet was utterly paralyzed. The precision was maddening, the restraint chilling. Admiral, a junior officer stammered. They're holding back. Why? Skrull stared at the towering vessel on the view screen, its glowing field casting a ghostly pall over his fleet. The Terrans could have obliterated them, wiped them from existence without a trace. But they hadn't. That single question burned in his mind. What kind of enemy wields such power, and chooses not to use it? Skrull stood in the war room of his flagship, his claws tapping rhythmically against the edge of the strategy console. The image of the Terran warship loomed before him, its shifting energy field taunting him. He couldn't defeat it through brute strength, that much was clear. But perhaps there was another way. The Zixer prided themselves on direct, honorable combat, yet Skrull knew honor alone wouldn't save them. He reviewed ancient tactics, digging into strategies long discarded by his people. If he could isolate the Invictus and force a confrontation in the debris field of a nearby asteroid belt, its size might become a disadvantage. Admiral, one of his officers interjected. This plan violates the principles of open battle. Skrull's gaze hardened. Principles won't matter if we're dead. The Terrans don't fight by our rules. If we're to survive, we must adapt. The officer hesitated but nodded. As the room cleared, Skrull allowed himself a moment of reflection. The Zixer had always valued strength and honor, yet those values now felt brittle in the face of an enemy who seemed to wield both with more meaning. The whispers about humanity lingered in his mind, not of their weapons, but of their restraint. Could they really be as monstrous as the legends claimed? A transmission interrupted his thoughts. The Invictus loomed larger on the screen, and a human figure appeared, shrouded in shadows. Admiral Skrull, the envoy began, voice steady. We've detected movement in the asteroid field. A bold maneuver. I wonder, do you understand what it is you fight for? I fight for my people, Skrull shot back. For their survival. And you think survival is achieved through defiance? The envoy's tone remained calm, almost disarming. Your fleet is crippled. Your traditions will not shield you. Yet we offer peace, not because we are weak, but because we value life. Peace through submission? Skrull growled. What kind of honor is that? Honor, the envoy replied, is the lie oppressors tell themselves to justify bloodshed. We've learned the cost of pride. Have you? Skrull's claws tightened. You speak of values while your ship looms over us like a predator. And yet, the envoy said, leaning forward, your fleet still breathes. The line went dead. Skrull's officers looked to him for orders, uncertainty etched across their faces. He hesitated only a moment before giving the signal to execute his plan. Zixer ships moved into the asteroid field, their formations tight and disciplined. At first, it seemed the Terrans hadn't noticed. Then the Invictus advanced, effortlessly navigating the chaos of the debris field. Skrull's ship struck first, unleashing a barrage of energy beams. For a moment, hope flared as the Invictus appeared to falter. But then, as if swatting away an insect, it countered. Precision strikes disabled weapon systems and propulsion units across Skrall's fleet. No explosions, no fatalities, just silence as ship after ship fell inert. "How are they doing this?" one officer whispered, panic creeping into their voice. Skrall's fist clenched as he watched his plan unravel. The Terrans weren't merely defeating them, they were dismantling the Zixer's sense of invincibility. And they were doing it without spilling blood. When the dust settled, Skrall's fleet was immobilized, scattered throughout the asteroid field like broken pieces of a puzzle. Yet not a single life had been lost. He stared at the Invictus, its presence as unyielding as ever, and for the first time, he felt the weight of his own doubt. What kind of enemy offers mercy in the face of defiance? And what did it mean for the Zixer if such mercy was the true measure of strength? The remnants of Skrall's fleet drifted aimlessly in the void, their once proud formations shattered. Systems flickered sporadically, powerless under the precision strikes of the Invictus. The Zixer vessels remained intact, but to their crews, the damage was far worse than destruction. Across the calm channels, silence reigned. No one dared speak, their collective shame a weight too heavy to bear. The Zixer had always believed themselves to be invincible, their pride rooted in a history of conquest. Now, that belief lay in ruins. On his flagship, Skrall watched as the Invictus held its position. It didn't pursue, didn't finish them off. The message was clear: this wasn't a battle. It was a lesson. The humans could destroy them, but they chose not to. His officers avoided his gaze, their expressions etched with fear and doubt. Pride demanded retaliation, but the fleet's spirit had been broken. Skrall could see it in their hunched postures, hear it in their reluctant acknowledgments of his orders. Reports flooded in, weapons offline, propulsion systems compromised, but not a single casualty. The precision was maddening. Skrall had underestimated the Terrans, not just their strength, but their mastery over the art of war itself. "Admiral," one officer finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "What do we do now?" The question hung in the air. Skrall's claws tapped against the console as he stared at the image of the Invictus. He felt the eyes of his ancestors on him, the weight of their expectations pressing down like a storm. To surrender would be to betray generations of warriors. To fight would be to consign his people to ruin. "Prepare the fleet," Skrall said finally, though the words tasted bitter. "We regroup and—" A transmission cut through the static, its tone calm but commanding. The human envoy appeared once more. "Admiral Skrall," the envoy said, their expression unreadable. "You've seen the consequences of defiance. Yet we have not taken lives, nor do we wish to. Humanity extends its hand in peace. Accept it, and your fleet will be free to return to your space. Reject it, and we will ensure you never pose a threat again." Skrall's claws tightened. "You call this peace? Humiliating us? Stripping us of our defenses?" The envoy's gaze didn't waver. "Peace through strength, Admiral. Strength tempered by restraint. We don't fight to conquer. We fight to ensure that what happened to us never happens again." The room fell silent. Skrall's officers exchanged confused glances, their curiosity piqued despite their fear. "What happened to you?" Skrall asked, his voice low. The envoy's demeanor softened, their voice tinged with something almost like sorrow. "We were once like you, proud, unyielding, convinced that strength alone would secure our survival. That pride led to our near extinction. We learned, Admiral. True strength lies not in domination but in knowing when to stop." Skrall stared at the envoy, his mind racing. The Zixer had always viewed restraint as weakness, yet here stood an enemy who wielded restraint as a weapon more devastating than any blade. The envoy's expression turned resolute. "We've given you a choice. Make it wisely." The transmission ended. Skrall's claws hovered over the controls, his mind a battlefield of conflicting emotions. His people demanded honor. His survival demanded submission. And in the silence of the bridge, Skrall felt the weight of that choice press against his very core. Skrall stood at the command console, the weight of the decision pressing on him as if the entire fleet rested on his shoulders. His claws hovered over the controls, hesitation anchoring him in place. To surrender meant to abandon everything his ancestors had fought for, to admit that the Zixer's traditions of strength and conquest had failed. But to fight on would mean annihilation, not just of the fleet, but of his people's future. He inhaled deeply, steadying himself. Pride was a fleeting thing. Survival, however, could pave the way for something greater. "Send a transmission to the Terran vessel," he commanded, his voice steady despite the turmoil within. His officers looked at him, some in shock, others in quiet relief. "Tell them we accept their terms." The bridge fell silent as the message was sent. Skrull braced himself, expecting mockery or demands for further humiliation. But when the reply came, it was measured, almost respectful. "This is the Invictus," the human envoy replied. "Your surrender is acknowledged. You will retain control of your fleet. Repairs and resources will be provided to ensure your safe passage back to Zixer space. We thank you for choosing peace." Skrull's breath hitched, the unexpected kindness unsettling him more than any weapon could. He had expected dominance, perhaps even derision. But this was different. The Invictus moved to the edges of the fleet, scanning for life support failures and offering assistance. Zixer crews, though wary, accepted. Reports came in of human engineers working side by side with Zixer mechanics, repairing damaged systems with an efficiency that was almost unnerving. Skrull observed it all from his station, unable to suppress his astonishment. This was no victory in the traditional sense. There were no captives, no conquered territories. Instead, it was as if humanity's goal had been to show them another way. Later, in a secure communication channel, the human envoy appeared again. This time, there was no pretense, no veiled threats. "Admiral Skrull," they began, "your decision today may have saved more lives than you realize. It's not weakness to choose survival over pride." Skrull studied the envoy, their words lingering in his mind. "Why do you do this?" he asked. "You could have destroyed us, made an example of us. Yet you didn't." The envoy's expression softened. "Because destruction is easy. Building something better is harder, but it's worth it. We believe in giving others the chance we were almost denied." Skrull felt an unfamiliar warmth in those words, a sincerity that pierced through his defenses. "And what do you expect in return? Subjugation? Tribute?" The envoys shook their head. "We expect nothing. But we hope for collaboration. Together, we can build something stronger than any fleet." The idea unsettled Skrull, but it also sparked something he hadn't felt in years: hope. For too long, the Zixer had seen every other species as a rival or threat. Perhaps there was another way. As the communication ended, Skrull turned to his officers. "We will return to Zixer space and regroup," he said. "But not for war. It's time we reconsider what it means to be strong." His words were met with mixed reactions: confusion, skepticism, even anger. But in some, he saw a flicker of understanding. As the fleet prepared to depart, Skrull gazed at the Invictus one last time. Humanity had shown strength, yes, but it was their compassion that had truly won the day. He resolved to carry that lesson forward, even if it meant challenging everything his people believed. The Zixer and humanity had been enemies for a fleeting moment, but Skrull felt certain they could become something more. Allies. Builders. Survivors of a shared galaxy. The journey ahead would be long and fraught with challenges, but for the first time in his life, Skrull saw a future where war was not the only path forward. And it was a future worth fighting for.